considered American, a maritime.
American born.
American women, American women, born women.
Legislation, born legislation, born legislation, American born legislation, American legislation, American legislation,
American women legislation, women to work with who served American
born. We have an American
women.
Legislation.
Women. Legislation. Women.
Bloomin' American born legislation. Born.
Women legislation. Women, American women,
legislation. Women legislation. Women country.
American legislation. American legislation. Born American legislation. Born American born.
Women born.
Legislation. Born legislation. American legislation. Born legislation. Born and the legislation. Born women.
Born.
Legislation. Born.